Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from the bunker, and in this video we absolutely must talk about the March 2020 JW Broadcasting episode, which was hosted by governing body member Mark Sanderson. Now there's a heck of a lot to get through, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Imagine for a moment that you're planning a road trip. You have everything you need: a map, a car, and plenty of fuel. Before you start the engine, though, you need to know your destination. Wouldn't you agree? If you don't know where you're trying to go, you won't know which road to take. The same is true of our ministry, which is, in a sense, like that road trip. What's the destination that we want to reach? Jesus identified it at Matthew chapter 28 and verses 19 and 20. There he said, "Go therefore and make disciples of people of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all the things I have commanded you." Our destination, then, is a baptized disciple. Each person we meet, each piece of literature that we place, each time we direct attention to the website, each return visit we make, each Bible study we conduct, we should have the final goal of making a baptized disciple.
So as you've probably been able to gather, Mark Sanderson is here talking to us about baptism, and I found his comments interesting, even though for the most part he's kind of stating the obvious. I mean, every Jehovah's Witness knows that the whole point of their work is to recruit people into the religion. I'm sure that wouldn't come as a surprise even to most outsiders who know nothing about the religion when they see Jehovah's Witnesses calling on doors in their street, or they see Jehovah's Witnesses manning carts in the street. I'm sure they're not thinking, well, they're doing this to just place literature or make people feel good or whatever. I'm sure most people grasp that at some level this is all about converting people. It's about winning people into the religion. But I still found this interesting from the point of view of the way Watchtower presents itself to quote-unquote Caesar, particularly in the UK when it comes to their charitable status, because the UK has a law stipulating that for a charity to be a charity, they need to do something that's in the public benefit. And I've long argued that you can't really say that the work Jehovah's Witnesses do is in the public benefit if it's purely all about bringing more people into the religion. This is an objective that benefits the leaders and, I suppose, to some degree, existing members, but it doesn't objectively benefit the public in general when you have a religion whose sole objective is to bring in new converts. And I've actually edited Mark Sanderson's talk to make it a bit less tedious, because he has this very condescending, patronizing, laborious way of explaining his points, which again mostly amounts to stating the obvious. But there is just a graphic in his talk in which he lists potential objectives that Jehovah's Witnesses might have when they're going about their preaching work. Objective 1, is it placing literature? Objective 2, directing people to jw.org. Notice there it has registered trademark. Apparently you're not allowed to use jw.org unless you get permission from Watchtower, because even the URL apparently is a registered trademark. But anyway, let's move on. Point 3, is the objective making return visits? Point 4, starting Bible studies. Point 5, educating people about the Bible. Point 6, making disciples of Christ Jesus and baptizing them. And the point he goes on to make is obviously, well, it's point 6. Yes, to a degree, Jehovah's Witnesses are involved in points 1 to 5, but all of those things ultimately are just a means of getting to the destination. By the way, I found all of the graphics in Mark Sanderson's talk so infuriating, because what he's saying is perfectly understandable. We don't need to see visualizations of roads and signs, and later on we're going to see aircraft taking off and landing. We don't need all that. What you're saying is already very simple and straightforward, arguably too simple and straightforward. But the point he's making is that all of these other things are just to get witnesses to the destination of converting people. And what infuriates me, again, with regards to the Charity Commission, is if you look at their most recent documents. This is for the year ending 31st of August 2018. And this is for the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Britain. Look at the objectives and activities there, and let's see where it says baptizing people into our religion. The memorandum and governing document states that the objectives of the society are to advance the Christian religion, that's not the objective, as practiced by the body of Christians known as Jehovah's Witnesses. This is accomplished by the following specific objectives. A. Promoting the preaching of the gospel of God's kingdom under Jesus Christ in all the nations as a witness to the name, word, and supremacy of Almighty God, Jehovah, no mention of baptism. B. Producing and distributing Bibles and other religious literature in any medium and educating the public in respect thereof. Again, no mention of baptism. C. Promoting religious worship. No mention of baptism. D. Promoting missionary work of the Christian religion as practiced by the body of Christians known as Jehovah's Witnesses. No mention of baptism. Finally, point E. Advancing religious education. Again, no mention of baptism. So they are literally saying one thing to Caesar when it suits them, because they're trying to come up with justifications as to how they can be thought of as a charity. They're trying to spin what they do in a way that will impress outsiders into thinking, well, these are all things that are offered on a no-strings-attached basis that can benefit anyone, whether they're a Jehovah's Witness or not. Only when you actually watch the material that's directed at believing members do you see what the true motive is. And the true motive, obviously, is to recruit members, is to grow the membership. Does the public benefit from that? Clearly not, or at least it cannot be objectively stated that it is a beneficial thing for anyone to become a Jehovah's Witness. Clearly it's to the benefit of Mark Sanderson and the other governing body members to have more people following them. So it's no surprise at all to see him making videos like this saying, let's just focus, shall we, on bringing more people into our religion. But it's not in the benefit of people in general. And that's why I find it infuriating that the organization routinely misrepresents itself to Satan's system of things when it suits them. This is an organization that has nothing but bad things to say about Satan's system of things. But when it comes to charitable status and when it comes to tax exemptions and things that will benefit the leaders, they are willing to say more or less anything to get their way.
Watch this video and see if you can identify the problem that our brother has.
You going out in field service after lunch?
Yes, I'm gonna be there, but I've got one return visit that I gotta make.
All right, see you then.
My neighbor lost his job after 20 years. And as a result, he's got to move out of his house, got to move into an apartment. I decided to go help him out a little bit to pack up, make it a little easier for him to make that move.
You know, won't it be nice a time period where we don't have to worry about economic troubles like that?
Yeah, it will. You know, that's why I'm so happy that my grandchildren chose to go for higher education. They both landed good jobs. On that bridge that you cross when you come here, you've noticed that they're starting to do some work on it. And that's pretty extensive work. They're going to replace that whole bridge. So according to the newspaper article, it's going to be like a 6 to 8 month project.
Wow, that is a long time. You know, Chris, the reason why I came by is I wanted to show you this magazine.
I love these. These are so well written.
Isaiah 48:17 is a key scripture here. Notice what it says. I, Jehovah, am your God, the one teaching you to benefit yourself.
That's familiar. I think your dad read that to me once or twice. How's your dad doing anyway?
Doing good. You know, they said they've got more Bible studies than they can even cover in 1 week.
Well. You know, I can remember when you and your dad came here. You were a little kid about this high. And you just stayed right by his side. And your dad was so proud.
You know, Chris, I know my dad had offered to study the Bible with you in the past.
John, to be honest, I'm too old to change. Set in my ways now. I think that God's just going to have to take me the way I am. More chocolate?
Yeah, don't mind.
Could you identify with the brother in that video? Have you ever had a return visit with someone who just loves your company? Perhaps you've been leaving literature with that person for months, even years, and yet the person has no genuine interest in progressing. Why is that a problem? Apparently, the person isn't interested in becoming a disciple of Christ Jesus.
It's a problem because the person won't end up following Mark and his chums. That is literally what we're talking about here. It's one thing to read about it in the magazines, but when it's straight out of the mouth of a governing body member, we can look at Mark and say, this is about you, isn't it? This is about your power, your influence, and your control. Yes, along with 7 other governing body members, but ultimately this is personal for you. You have a vested interest in people getting baptized as Jehovah's Witnesses. So you're bound to be irritated at this idea of witnesses going round to leave magazines with people and those people not chomping at the bit to get involved in a religion that preaches that the solution to mankind's problems is to decimate 7.5 billion people. Surprisingly, that grim vision of the future doesn't appeal to everybody. And yes, you can be a good person and not subscribe to such a wicked, grotesque interpretation of the Bible or religion. But that's clearly not where Mark's head is at. And as such, as his talk unfolds, he's going to draw the distinction for us between people who would waste the time of witnesses by accepting the literature and not making progress with their Bible studies, and those who are rightly disposed for everlasting life. Yes, that's the language he's going to use as this talk progresses.
Some people are glad to study the Bible with us simply for the fact that they value Bible education. And we love to teach people about the Bible. But we have to remember that providing Bible education for its own sake is not our primary goal. In fact, it could be a side road. The fact is, some people who value Bible education are not interested in becoming baptized disciples of Jesus. The world's full of Bible scholars who are highly educated in the Bible, but who do not become disciples of Christ Jesus. For example, one Bible scholar was educated at a Bible institute, a religious college, and a theological seminary. He holds a doctorate in religious studies. He has a thorough knowledge of biblical Greek, and he's written 30 books about the Bible. Yet he describes himself as an agnostic atheist. So just providing Bible education is not our primary goal. We want people to build faith in God and to have their own relationship with Jehovah that will move them toward the destination of dedication and baptism.
It's quite chilling that a man who has in the palm of his hand the minds of 8.5 million Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide could be, there's no other way of putting it, so stupid and so incapable of drawing the rather obvious conclusions from what he himself is saying. What he's suggesting here is that if you study the Bible, you must automatically be not just a believer in Christianity, but the more you study the Bible, the more inevitable it will be that you will realize that Mark Sanderson, Tony Morris, Stephen Lett, Samuel Hurd, Gerrit Loesch, Jeffrey Jackson, Kenneth Cook, David Splain, it will just become obvious to you the more you read the Bible that these men are the faithful slave and that you need to follow them as a Jehovah's Witness. That is not obvious at all from reading the Bible. It's not even clear just from reading the Bible that you would automatically assume it to be the infallible Word of God. And I was tweeting about this at the time because there's so much to say about just this clip. He's clearly describing Bart Ehrman here. Bart Ehrman is the only Bible scholar I'm aware of who matches up perfectly to all of the criteria that Mark Sanderson has spelled out. And if you think about it, the fact that Mark Sanderson is here describing Bart Ehrman should say something about just how much cognitive dissonance is going on with this man. I mean, to be aware of Bart Ehrman, but to just dismiss his knowledge and credentials purely on the basis that he is an agnostic atheist. What does that tell you? In a way, I'm glad that he's pointing the finger so unmistakably at Ehrman, because hopefully that might cause at least some witnesses to do some digging, even if Ehrman hasn't been named, which, if you think about it, is rather disingenuous of Sanderson. If his point is so strong, what's he so afraid of? Why can't he just say Bart Ehrman? But anyway, the point Sanderson is making is that it's ludicrous to study the Bible to the extent that someone like Bart Ehrman has studied the Bible and not reach the conclusion that A, God is real, B, God happens to be, out of all of the many gods throughout history, the Christian God, and C, the faithful slave are God's current spokespersons. So anyway, I was tweeting about this, and I think I got quite a bit of reaction, and someone drew the excellent analogy of Mein Kampf. You can read Mein Kampf and not become a Nazi. I'm not suggesting that belief in God is tantamount to being a Nazi. I'm making the point that you can read a book that espouses ideas and still disagree with those ideas while finding merit in studying the book for its own sake and understanding what motivated the writer, where they were coming from, what their objectives were. You can be fascinated by all of those things. You can want to know that book inside out and not agree with the conclusions of the writer. And that's where Mark Sanderson's cult-addled mind is bereft of nuance. How can someone so incapable of grasping nuance, again, be in charge of 8.5 million minds? Doesn't it say something? If you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, because I don't trust Mark Sanderson to grasp this point, even if it was spelled out for him in massive letters on a whiteboard. But doesn't it say something about the Bible, and indeed about Jehovah's Witness theology, that there are so few Bible scholars who are Jehovah's Witnesses? In fact, is there a single Bible scholar who's a Jehovah's Witness? I know Mark Sanderson seems to fancy himself as quite the Bible scholar, but are there any actual Bible scholars with actual credentials who are Jehovah's Witnesses? I'd be interested to know. I'm not aware of any. I'm not saying it's impossible that you could be a Bible scholar and a Jehovah's Witness, because the delusion is strong. But doesn't that say something, that it's so hard to think of an accredited, bona fide Bible scholar who's a Jehovah's Witness? Doesn't that rather send the message that this religion isn't as Bible-based as the leaders would have you believe? Or at least, doesn't it throw doubt on that claim? And doesn't it, by the same token, throw some doubt on the ideology behind Christianity, if it's possible to study the Bible to the extent that someone like Bart Ehrman has studied the Bible and have cause to doubt that it was inspired by an all-wise, all-knowing creator? Shouldn't that, if anything, lead you to a line of thinking that might cause you to be just a little bit more skeptical as to whether you have all the answers just because you read your Bible? Is there not more to it than that? Or might there not be some value in knowing what these Bible scholars know? What's caused them to reach these conclusions? What's causing them not to be Jehovah's Witnesses? What's causing some of them to be agnostic atheists? Wouldn't you want to know? I'd want to know. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. I have found out far more about the Bible since leaving Jehovah's Witnesses than I ever found out as a witness. Yes, I have the basic head knowledge of the basic narrative and some of the names, etc., etc. But when it comes to actually understanding who wrote the Bible, when it was written, why it was written, I have learnt so much more since leaving the Witnesses and actually not being afraid to take in what scholars are saying than I ever learned as a witness. And actually, I found it more interesting. I found it way more interesting hearing what scholars have to say than just sitting there at the meetings and listening to this never-ending, repetitive babble that just goes round and round in circles, never advances, never progresses. It's just always the same basic narrative as to what the Bible is, who wrote it, and how we're supposed to interpret its meaning. Yes, you will get new light every now and then about certain prophecies, but the basic theology is practically unchanged in decades. And it can be so repetitive, going to meetings and just hearing it again and again and again. And then when you read a book by Ehrman or by another scholar, maybe dealing with Bible archaeology, it's honestly, it's like someone's just opened the windows wide and the air has just come rushing in. It's so refreshing to actually learn from people who have devoted their lives to understanding, for better or worse, where these texts have come from and who wrote them. And if you are interested in learning more about Bart Ehrman, who apparently is at least known to Mark Sanderson, here is one video that I can highly recommend in which he debates William Lane Craig, a well-known Christian apologist, and he gives you at least a flavour of what might have led him to the conclusions that he has reached as an agnostic atheist. So I'll leave that there for you, and let's press on to the next clip.
But why is it so important to be selective about who we spend our time with? Isn't conducting an unproductive study better than knocking on doors where no one's home or where no one shows interest? We want to focus our attention on deserving ones, as Jesus instructed, people who are rightly disposed for everlasting life.
I told you Mark Sanderson was going to use this phrase, those who are rightly disposed for everlasting life. If you think about it, there's an element of predestination going on here, because this whole idea of people being rightly disposed suggests that you can be wrongly disposed. And who gets to decide that? Is it the person themselves, or is it God? And probably if you're watching this as a Jehovah's Witness, you're immediately thinking of the verses that describe God drawing people to him. Well, if you think about it, that's predestination. Because all well and good if you get to decide whether you are rightly disposed or not. But if it's God that's making that calling, if it's God that's pulling you, then what about people who aren't being pulled by God? If the penalty for not being pulled is destruction, how is that fair? But there's actually more to it if you think about it, because this is a classic example of using words to manipulate people. Because if you buy into this rhetoric that people can be rightly disposed for everlasting life, what that serves to do is dehumanize people who don't share your opinions if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So if someone fails to be persuaded by your arguments, it could be that they fail to be persuaded simply because you're not very good at conveying the arguments, or it could be that they fail to be persuaded because the arguments themselves don't make sense. But you're then expected to walk away from the householder thinking, well, they're not rightly disposed for everlasting life. It's their fault. They are worthy of destruction because they disagree with my views. That is not a healthy way to think of one's fellow man.
When I started studying the Bible, there were various factors that hindered my study. I was a truck driver and I was on the road a lot. I had the worst kind of friendships and I smoked. I smoked on average 60 cigarettes a day. I realized that if I was going to make the needed adjustments, I had to change my profession. So I changed my job, but if I wanted to get baptized, I had to stop smoking. I cut down to 2 or 3 cigarettes a day. One day I bought a single cigarette. I lit it and I prayed to Jehovah. I begged him to help me. And he did help me, so much so that I never smoked again. And to this day, I don't even have the urge to smoke. 10 years after my first Bible study, I was baptized. I've been serving Jehovah for 20 years now, along with my wife and all my children.
Did you notice this man had to pray to Jehovah to get the help he needed to overcome smoking?
I don't agree that he had to pray to Jehovah or do anything Jehovah's Witness related in order to overcome smoking. If you're going to make that argument, Mark Sanderson, what you need to do is prove that it's impossible to quit smoking unless you become one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Clearly, you're not going to be able to do that, because clearly, without even going and checking and running surveys and what have you, clearly there are going to be people who quit smoking or quit drinking or quit whatever without doing so because this is what Jehovah's Witnesses require of them.
I planted, Apollos watered, but God kept making it grow. so that neither is the one who plants anything, nor is the one who waters, but God who makes it grow. So never feel that your efforts are unimportant. Just as Paul said, what's accomplished in the ministry is a group effort. When a person reaches baptism, it isn't just because of the effort of the person who conducted the study. The efforts of others played a role. Perhaps someone else initiated that person's interest by placing literature, or in some other way giving a witness. But remember what Paul said. Jehovah is the one who makes it grow. He's the one that's drawing to himself those who are rightly disposed for everlasting life.
The whole point of this part of his talk is seemingly to reassure witnesses who aren't having a productive ministry, who don't have Bible studies, who haven't brought anyone to baptism, that it doesn't matter because, well, as long as you're doing your best, it's a team effort, and at least you're trying, so that if someone is rightly disposed to be drawn by God to worship him, they're in with a chance because you're there calling on them, or you're handing out literature or whatever. This whole part is intended to reassure witnesses, but I would just ask witnesses to think about this. Really think about this. We had that scripture there from 1 Corinthians 3, 6 and 7. I planted, Apollos watered, but God kept making it grow. What about when God doesn't make it grow? That would be my question. He's clearly not letting it grow or making it grow with everyone. If he's drawing some people, then he isn't drawing other people. Again, if it's all down to the individual, fine. But what we're being told here is that actually it's not down to the individual, it's down to God. It's down to God making it grow, and it's down to God drawing people to him. Well, that's predestination. If God gets to decide who learns about him and who is fit for salvation because they get to learn all about what his requirements are, then the whole game is rigged, isn't it? The whole game is rigged against some people who just seem to be born for damnation. I've mentioned this on the channel before because it was actually Megan Phelps-Roper in an interview with Joe Rogan who put me on to Romans 9. If you are a Jehovah's Witness, read Romans 9. Just read it on its own terms and think about what it's saying. Read verses 11 and 12, speaking about Jacob and Esau, where it says, "For when they had not yet been born, and they had not practiced anything, good or bad, so that God's purpose respecting the choosing might continue dependent not on works, but on the one who calls, it was said to her," that's, I think, Rebecca, their mother, "the older will be the slave of the younger, just as it is written, I loved Jacob, but Esau I hated." They hadn't been born yet, and God hated Esau. That's predestination. And it even goes on. Paul kind of realizes how grotesque this is and says in the very next verse, "What are we to say then? Is there injustice with God? Certainly not." And then later on, the ultimate answer seems to be, "You will therefore say to me," this is God speaking, "why does he still find fault? For who has withstood his will? But who are you, O man, to be answering back to God? Does the thing moulded say to its moulder, why did you make me this way?" God literally saying in Romans 9, who do you think you are to question all this? I get to decide if I want the game to be rigged I get to decide if I'm going to make some vessels worthy for destruction and some worthy for praise. I get to decide if some people get drawn to me or not, if some people get to learn about what's at stake. I'll decide all that based on my mercy. You just have to go along with the game. It's whichever way you want to spin it. Read Romans 9. I'm sorry, it's predestination. And it just amazes me that in trying to make witnesses feel better who are having an unproductive time with their preaching work, Mark Sanderson cannot help but refer to something that basically, when you think about it long enough, causes the whole thing to unravel.
What a privilege we have to be fellow workers with Jehovah as we help people become disciples of Christ Jesus. If we keep that goal clearly in mind, how will it help us? We won't be content just to place literature or just to direct interest to jw.org. We won't be satisfied just making return visits or starting Bible studies. We'll always have in mind our primary destination, making disciples of Christ and baptizing them. We of the governing body wish you Jehovah's rich blessing as you work shoulder to shoulder with us in helping rightly disposed ones become baptized disciples of Jesus.
Maybe I'm just being overly cynical, but to me that sounded like, don't be satisfied with just doing your best. Don't be content just because you've left lots of literature, you've made it possible for God to draw these people because they now have the final piece of the jigsaw right in front of them. They have a jw.org business card, or they have a tract, or they have maybe a video that you're showing them, or a piece of literature. They have the final piece of the puzzle, bearing in mind what we've only just heard, that it's God who makes things grow. It's God who draws people. No, you have got to take it personally if a baptism doesn't ensue. You can't be satisfied just with doing the work. The hours and hours of work that it takes just to do all of those things that he's mentioned, point people towards jw.org, place literature, show people videos, conduct Bible studies. No, none of that is relevant, apparently, compared to the all-consuming goal of baptism, which again is not featured anywhere in the official documentation forwarded to the Charity Commission and the government by Watchtower. They don't want the world, Satan's system of things, to know that that's what they're really all about. But it is, let's be honest, what they are all about, even to the point where hard-working witnesses, including pioneers who dedicate 70 hours a month, can't just be satisfied with doing their best, with doing what they can. They have to take it personally if baptisms are not resulting from their efforts.
My relationship with Jehovah has gotten stronger. When I pray now, it feels like I'm talking to my close friend.
Going on service more, I think it really helped me to draw closer to Jehovah and making the kingdom feel real to me. And so that's why I wanted to get baptized.
What a great pleasure it was for me when 4 months later I could dedicate myself to Jehovah and get baptized. That made me so happy.
Today is a very, very special day for me because today I'm getting baptized.
At the Regional Convention, August 9th, 2014. It was a beautiful day. I often think, God, is it true? Is it real? Do I really deserve to have all these blessings?
All these blessings have helped me to see that this life provides true satisfaction and true happiness.
So those were just a few clips from a montage that's been put together for the March broadcasting episode. A montage of various previous broadcasting episodes together with some footage that witnesses have seen at their conventions, showing people talking about their journey towards baptism and how it made them feel. And this is what I really wanted to pick up on, specifically that footage before that, again, I've already commented on, and so I don't really want to repeat myself too much, but there's the girl who says, the more I went out in the preaching work, the more God felt real to me, or words along those lines.
Going on service more, I think it really helped me to draw closer to Jehovah and making the kingdom feel real to me.
It shouldn't matter how it makes you feel. It should matter whether it's true. No amount of feeling makes something that isn't true, true. It's basically irrelevant. Whether you feel privileged, whether you feel like this is too good to be true, it's basically irrelevant whether it makes you feel good or not. Because look at how many people in other religions are managing to conjure exactly the same feelings and exactly the same sense of satisfaction. You think they're lying, do you? When you meet them in the door-to-door work and they say how much their worship means to them and how special it makes them feel and how it gives them this close personal bond with God, you think they're lying to you. Why would they lie? They're not lying. It's how they honestly feel. But therein lies the problem. Your feelings are not an accurate barometer of truth. Your feelings can, for example, lead you to spend decades in an abusive relationship because someone is taking advantage of your feelings for them. So it's frankly irrelevant. It irritates me, quite frankly, when I hear these testimonies, when you're making it all about emotions and emotional responses to things, you're basically admitting that your beliefs don't have logical basis, and you're actually exploiting other people's emotions in the process.
When I was 8 years old, my parents separated, which came as a huge shock to me. It was devastating, and the consequences just seemed to roll on for decades. I would go and stay at the farm with my father for school holidays, but my dad, he abused alcohol and smoked cigarettes and used bad language. So by the time I was a teenager, I was doing exactly the same thing. In my later teens, I was smoking marijuana every day, and I was spending up to 4 nights a week at pubs and clubs and parties. I was addicted to alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana and pornography, and I had no power to stop. Obviously, it was only a matter of time before that lifestyle affected my health. I lost my social skills and I became depressed. The turning point in my life came one afternoon when 2 of Jehovah's Witnesses knocked on my door. Because of feeling so lost and so unhappy, I had started to search for answers, and I'd begun looking at New Age teachings. The timing felt too remarkable to be just coincidence. I really felt like God wanted me to take the book. I never looked at New Age teachings again. I started to read the Greatest Man book instead. A major key for me to be able to make the necessary changes was to cut off bad association. I was baptised in March 1994. When I finally took that step, I felt like I'd started on the right path. I was so grateful that Jehovah had found me and that he'd drawn me.
Notice there again, Jehovah had found me and he'd drawn me. So I'm not exaggerating when I characterize the way witnesses are being encouraged to think about the process for someone becoming a Jehovah's Witness and getting baptized. But let's think about this story here. It's basically your bog standard testimonial whereby a desperate wretch, a worldly person who is sinking into all sorts of depravity, finds their way to Jehovah's Witnesses, and everything suddenly corrects itself, and the person has the best life ever as a result of adopting Jehovah's Witness teachings. It's the same old trope again and again and again in broadcast after broadcast after broadcast. But I wanted to zero in on something. I wanted to zero in on when he said the timing was too precise for it to just be coincidence, or words to that effect.
The timing felt too remarkable to be just coincidence.
Well, let's just think about this for a moment before we leap to assuming that the almighty creator of the cosmos has seen you with your various addictions and your health problems and your desperate state, and has just dropped everything when he could have been literally stopping children from dying at that moment, or curing diseases, or ending wars. He could have been doing any number of things. Instead, oh no, this guy in Australia, he needs to become a Jehovah's Witness. I'm going to get some witnesses to call on him. There's a real arrogance, and it's going to pop up again, I'm afraid, in this testimonial. And I'm sorry to say, but it's not exclusive to Jehovah's Witnesses. You get this in other incarnations of Christian belief, where people have the arrogance to assume that God is somehow helping them personally while ignoring unfathomable death and suffering and evil that's going on at the same time. Oh no, God has come to my rescue. I am the center of the universe, and I am the one God cares about. So of course he's going to drop everything else and come to my rescue. We're going to see the same arrogance in the next clip I'm going to show you. But what about this claim of it being too much of a coincidence? Well, really, we have a religion with millions of followers, and the whole point of the religion, as we've just been learning, is to make new disciples, is to recruit people, and the way that's done primarily is by calling on people at their homes. So you have millions of people on the planet, thousands of them, I don't know how many thousands, but thousands of them in Australia, fixated with calling on as many homes as possible. You're telling me they're never going to call on someone when they're in the state this man was in? You're telling me that that's just a total coincidence? Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And what does it say about Jehovah's Witnesses? That their beliefs only start to make sense to people when they are at their very lowest, when they are in the dirt, when they are addled by addiction, when they are feeling lost, when they are feeling depressed, as he said there, basically when they are not in a position to objectively appraise a belief system by applying critical thinking. That's the time. That's the time that the creator of the universe gets witnesses to call. What does that say about the religion itself? If people need to be in that desperate state for it to begin to make sense.
When we were invited to start circuit work, I had serious doubts about my inadequacies. I was not fast at preparing talks. For me, it always felt like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. But the very morning after receiving our assignment to go on the circuit work full time, my Bible reading was Exodus chapters 3 and 4, where Moses cited his inadequacies to Jehovah that he was not a fluent speaker. Well, of course, Jehovah asked him, "Who is it that assigns a mouth?" It was like Jehovah was saying to me, "Don't worry, I will help you."
I hope I'm not mischaracterizing what he's saying here. Please let me know if I am. But what he seems to be saying is that, again, the creator of the cosmos dropped everything to leave him a message. He arranged for this man to have the Bible reading in Exodus 3 and 4 of the part where Moses is complaining about not being a good speaker and God reassuring him, and giving him that Bible reading in the week that he was asked to become a circuit overseer was God's personal message to him. He is that important out of billions of people on the planet. He is so personally important to the creator of the cosmos that he deserves a personal message, and the personal message came through in the form of his Bible reading assignment. Is it just me, viewers? Or is that not incredibly arrogant thinking to assume that you are that important? But that's exactly the sort of thinking that is encouraged for Jehovah's Witnesses, hence why all of this is in this month's JW Broadcasting episode.
Getting baptized when you're young can lead to a life filled with rich blessings. With that in mind, I'm so happy to welcome today a very dear friend of mine, Brother Robert P. Johnson. RP, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate being here.
And so then when did the moment come for you to finally get baptized?
I was at the 1953 International Convention, Yankee Stadium, New York, on July 22, 1953, that I was baptized. And again, I remember that like it was yesterday. When I came up out of the water, I thank Jehovah that finally I am one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I also, like a child, added, "You can bring the end anytime now."
Like a child, although clearly it was significant enough for him to be mentioning it now in 2020. Clearly it's not that stupid in the minds of Jehovah's Witnesses, or he wouldn't be bringing it up, would he? But I submit Exhibit B or C to my earlier reasoning about arrogance. How supremely arrogant. You've made it to baptism. You've just about squeaked through the doorway before it slams shut at Armageddon. And your response, I think he was 14 at the time, your response is, "Now you can bring Armageddon because I'm alive, because I've made it, because I'm safe." And that's all that matters. This is, I'm sorry, he can say, "Oh, this was just childish thinking," but that's the attitude that you have, that you're encouraged to have as a Jehovah's Witness. I'm all right, Jack. The rest of the world be damned. As long as I'm okay, as long as my family are okay, my believing family, bring on Armageddon and let's see 7.5 billion men, women and children get destroyed, as long as I'm okay.
Now, just from your expressions and what you talked about with me before, I could see that this Brother Richardson had a tremendous impact on your life. And I think, RP, it really made you want to be a trainer of other people, because that's how I first met you, right?
Right.
You were the brother assigned to be my trainer when I came to the service department.
I remember that fondly.
And I know that I'm not the only one. I mean, you've really spent your whole life training other people.
Well, it's been a privilege.
A trainer in the service department. I wonder how that job goes. Here, brothers, you have an S77 form. Oh, this one is about someone who's been disfellowshipped for abusing a child. This is how we input this data into our computer. Here's the file. These are all the different fields. It's easy as pie. Follow along as we put the latest entry in our child abuse database. I'm not kidding. That's the sort of thing they do in the service department. And I think that tells us something about Mark Sanderson, given the fact that he was appointed to the governing body so very young. I think in order to be a candidate, a governing body candidate, you essentially need to have been exposed to at least some degree to the very worst of this organisation. And you are going to get a massive dose of that in the service department, because that's where all of the muck comes through. That's where you see the full horror of how the organisation is dealing with people who molest children and compiling all this information, keeping law enforcement out of the picture so that these individuals can just go on and abuse others and abuse others. And people like RP will have been taking phone calls about abusers who have gone on to abuse other children because it's been kept secret, because the record has been kept safe and sound in his department. So they can get all nostalgic if they like, but as far as I'm concerned, this is actually quite a telling window into what it takes to become a governing body member. And am I the only one who's a little bit bored of the governing body only interviewing people who are either Bethelites or personal friends? Because when RP started being interviewed, they introduced him as a special pioneer. Immediately I'm thinking, oh, well, that's good. They've cast the net a bit further afield. They're now bringing in special pioneers who aren't necessarily known to the governing body members. Kudos to Mark Sanderson for interviewing someone so randomly who he doesn't know. Oh, actually, you do know him. It is really all about connections when it comes to making appearances on JW Broadcasting. You need to be either a governing body helper or on very friendly terms with a governing body member. In this case, someone who trained a governing body member when he first arrived in the service department.
So now let's come back. You're 15 years old. You get baptized, Yankee Stadium. And now, as a result of being baptized at this age, how do you feel you were benefited?
For one thing, if you know what you want to do and you stay focused on it, it makes it easier to deal with whatever challenge come later. And so being dedicated and baptized early in life helped me to stay focused on the truth. I still remember that dedication. It means something to me. And I try to make it mean something to others for as young as they can possibly make it. And they'll find the same thing I found. Jehovah's blessing will be with them.
For as young as they can possibly make it. Well, the youngest recorded example of a baptism in Watchtower literature is 7. So that's how young it can get. Now, granted, in RP's example, I wrongly said 14 earlier, I should have said 15. In RP's example, he actually was asked to wait by his parents. He first wanted to get baptized, I think around the age of 11. He held out until 15 before getting baptized. But the whole point of him giving this story is to manipulate and coerce young children who might be watching this into thinking that it's good to get baptized as young as possible. I find that utterly reprehensible for reasons that I don't really need to explain yet again. Children aren't allowed to sign contracts. They're not allowed to gain employment. They're not allowed to buy and sell property, all for a good reason, because they are still developing as people, and no one can rightly expect them to commit to something before they are an adult. But that's not how Jehovah's Witnesses see things. They want children dunked as Jehovah's Witnesses as early as possible, because once that happens, they are in it for life. And I think that's what RP is referring to when his argument for getting baptized young is, oh, well, it helped me stay focused.
For one thing, if you know what you want to do and you stay focused on it, being dedicated and baptized early in life helped me to stay focused on the truth.
How does that argument not apply to getting baptized when you're older? Surely baptism is purely about the religion making sense, about you personally being convinced that it's God's one true religion. And you can be just as focused reaching that conclusion as an adult as you would be as a child. It's irrelevant, frankly. It's a non-argument until you factor in that the teenage years are something of an experimental period in which children start to learn critical thinking and start to learn how the world works, and could very easily come to the realization that the religion is not for them. Well, at least if you get baptized before your teens, or at least midway through your teens, you will be focused. In other words, you will be wedded to the religion, and you'll know that if you're going to do anything that is against the long list of rules that Watchtower gives you, you're toast. All of your connections with believing friends and family will be severed. So that's what he really means, I think, when RP talks about the benefit of being focused as someone who's baptized young.
There was a need. The organization was looking for brothers who could do traveling work. So at age 25, I had the privilege of being a traveling overseer.
What do you see as being the benefits of having a young traveling overseer?
For the congregation, they had somebody who could stay out in field service, long hours. And also, the younger traveling overseer could relate to the young people and the younger adults in the congregation. There were other benefits that even today, different ones that I served in earlier circuits, bring forth to me. For example, after having a good time in field service and then the meetings, I would do recreational things with the kids. And we ran track out in the streets, and we played board games, softball, basketball, and then we had good times just talking about the truth, and also talking about how you can put your ministry first, and there's plenty of time for seeking a mate later.
This is problematic footage in relation to what's going on at ICSA. Allow me to explain why. At ICSA, Shane Brady, the Watchtower lawyer, has been jumping through hoops to suggest that there are no elements of Jehovah's Witness worship in which children are separated from their parents.
Well, as a religion, we are family-focused. We do not sponsor any activity that separates children from parents. Also, we don't sponsor any activities that separate children from their parents, and as a result, it minimizes the opportunities for abuse.
It's probably worth me explaining why this is relevant. There seemed to be some confusion in the comments when I was covering this in my response video. The reason why Shane Brady is trying so hard here to basically lie and dupe ICSA into thinking that there are no activities in which children are separated from their parents is because the organization doesn't want to get lumbered with DBS checks. DBS stands for the Disclosure Barring Service. It basically means anyone who is working with children has to get a certificate, effectively, stating that they have no criminal convictions and they are not on any sex offenders register. That's a basic requirement for, say, teachers who work regularly with children, and it's therefore understandable that they would need to be free of any kind of convictions, any kind of criminal convictions in relation to, well, anything really, but especially pedophilia or anything of that nature. That's why Shane Brady is jumping up and down saying, we don't do anything in which children are separated from their parents. And yet you have RP waxing lyrical about the good old days when he was a 25-year-old circuit overseer who used to socialize with the young people because the young people could relate to him more because he was only 25. Am I the only one? I mean, I'm not suggesting he did anything inappropriate. I'm saying that he, as a circuit overseer, was unquestionably in a position of trust, in a position of authority, in a position where parents of children in the congregations where he visited would have been thinking, well, this guy is okay because he's a circuit overseer, so we're going to let our children spend time in recreation with him, doing baseball, volleyball, board games, whatever all those things were that he was mentioning. Hopefully, and I have to extend the benefit of the doubt, hopefully that won't have caused any problems, but you can easily see how it could cause problems and why we have, in the case of RP, an obvious example of why elders and circuit overseers, well, circuit overseers are elders, of why elders and, you could say, ministerial servants should be getting these DBS checks, should be getting a certificate from the authorities saying, I have no criminal convictions and I am not on any sex offenders register. A Jehovah's Witness watching this, whether you agree with me or not on child protection and Jehovah's Witnesses' response to it, you're going to be thinking, I can agree with that. I can agree that it would be preferable for elders and ministerial servants to be confirmed as not being criminal convicts, given the fact that they are in such positions of trust, and given that their positions of trust put them in situations where they have greater access to children. And again, this footage, RP's interview, it's ironic really that it appears in the March JW Broadcasting episode when in the very same month the ICSA hearings have started, albeit they're postponed at the moment due to you-know-what. And a Watchtower lawyer has been jumping through hoops to deceive ICSA into thinking, there's nothing to see here, folks. We can move along. There are no concerns about elders and ministerial servants needing to get that certificate, needing to be able to demonstrate that they're not convicts. And while, again, I want to extend the full benefit of the doubt to RP, he seems like a lovely guy. I have no reason to suspect him of any criminal behaviour whatsoever. I cannot help but find it a little bit creepy that in his position as a 25-year-old circuit overseer, he took it upon himself, apparently, to be dispensing relationship advice.
And then we had good times just talking about the truth and also talking about how you can put your ministry first, and there's plenty of time for seeking a mate later.
Again, it doesn't take a genius to extrapolate a situation in which that sort of talk about people's feelings for the opposite sex could easily be twisted into an opportunity to exploit people sexually. So again, for multiple reasons, this is an unfortunate piece of testimony. I just hope that the people who need to see this, the people who lawyers like Shane Brady are lying to are able to not only see this footage, but connect the dots and realize that there really is a problem here when it comes to elders and servants being in a position where they can exploit their power.
So the question I want to ask you is, when you're looking back now, these 60 wonderful years, more than 60 wonderful years, what would you say to young people who are facing the same decision that you faced when you were a little boy growing up in the truth?
It's the best thing I could have done with my life. And I had many opportunities. Jehovah blessed my humble efforts, as he has blessed you and others too. The young people today have even more opportunities because Jehovah's organization under the leadership of Jesus Christ is expanding and moving fast. And like Brother Richardson taught me, if you just make yourself available, then the organization will find a place for you and use you. And that's so true today. One of my greatest joys is to see the young people take the baton and run with it. And I have no regrets. There's been no challenge that overwhelmed me and made me regret things. There were challenges, of course, but with Jehovah's help, well, I'm here today. And that can be true of our young people. So seize the opportunity while you're young and experience the blessing that Jehovah gives those who serve him from youth onward.
Of course, he's not going to have any regrets. What does he have to compare his life with? He was baptized. Well, he wanted to be baptized when he was 11. He was baptized in 1953 at the age of 15. And he's had decades in the organization. So what's his means of comparing his life course with a different life course? He has nothing to compare it with. Of course he's going to say he has no regrets. Frankly, the more time he spends in this religion and the more he invests himself in this organization, the less likely it is that he could ever turn around and say, I regret this. Because the more he invests, the more he needs it to be true. Because he's looking back, if he ever has a glimmer of doubt, he's looking back at decades and decades of serving this organization. You reach a point where it has to be true. All of the work that he did in the service department covering up abuse, it has to be true. Because if it wasn't true, what I've done was horrific. So of course he's not going to have any regrets. But shame on him for trying to rope more generations into all this.
At this convention, we released the Greek scriptures in Swa and Sena.
Thank you very much, Jehovah, for this wonderful provision.
I will surely use it while speaking about Jehovah's name in Twa.
We are so happy to have this Bible in Twa language. It's easy to read and it will improve our family worship.
Those were the first two local languages in Mozambique to receive any part of the New World Translation, so it was a very exciting day.
Isn't it interesting that the month that Mark Sanderson is presenting JW Broadcasting, one of the video segments in his episode just happens to show him being a hero, him riding to the rescue at a convention in Mozambique and unveiling these fabulous new translations in various African languages for the grateful people. The narcissism is just so cringeworthy. You're not telling me he had nothing to do with this, or that it's just a total coincidence that he happens to be presenting it this month. Oh, and now a video that makes me look really good.
This convention was tied into 18 locations in Mozambique. A total of 1,685 were baptized.
I have faith in Jehovah and want to have a close relationship with him.
Many have commented on the fact that among the 981 that were baptized in Maputo, there were many young ones. And it just shows that the families here in Mozambique are working very hard with their young ones to help them to know Jehovah and love Jehovah and to know what it means to be courageous.
So at this point, the organization is openly bragging about the fact that it's bolstering its numbers by lying to children. That's what this amounts to. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, just play back that footage of Lucas and tell me that you're proud of an organization that boosts its statistics by exploiting people at this age when they clearly do not have a clue what's going on. I shudder to think how young Lucas is here. But this is just the norm for Jehovah's Witnesses in the 21st century. It doesn't matter that they're not old enough to vote, to get into employment, to take out loans, to sign contracts. We're going to make them sign the biggest contract of their lives, one that we're going to hold them to for the rest of their lives, even though they are not developed people yet, because they are clearly way too young.
There's nothing like the day you're baptized. Our new music video captures this in word and song.
If I give my life to you, you will always be my guide. As the days go by, you will see that I am forever on your side. Because you gave me hope that changed my life and strength to help me through. Because you gave your son to die for me, I give my life to you. I give my life to you. Because you gave me hope that changed my life and strength to help me through. Because you gave your son to die for me, I give my life to you. I give my life to you.
What a beautiful original song about the thoughts and feelings we each have when we dedicate our life to Jehovah.
Was it original? Yes. Well, kind of. I'm going to get to that. Was it beautiful? Well, I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but this beholder didn't find beauty in that. This was a song that celebrated giving one's life to an organization. And this is what it all boils down to. If you're watching this because you're just interested in learning more about Jehovah's Witnesses, it's all there in that song. It's not just about being a better person. It's not just about giving up smoking. It's not just about giving people a positive message. It's about giving your life over and doing so as young as possible, even to the point where we have kids like Lucas putting everything on the line, even though they're nowhere near close to being in a position to make that sort of commitment. No, let's grab them as young as we can. Let's grab them before they can possibly even begin to apply critical thinking to what we're telling them. It's shameless. And this music video is a celebration of that. I did also find it interesting that, is it me or is this the first time we've had a music video where Watchtower has gone full gospel with the choir and everything? We've had sort of leanings in that direction, but this, for me, is the first music video where you're listening to it and thinking, this could be on God TV. This could just be on any televangelism network. You could just literally copy paste this into almost any evangelical Christian context and it would not sound out of place. And doesn't that say everything about the organization and the fact that there's really nothing original about it? Where Christendom leads, Watchtower follows. Christendom is setting the pace. Christendom is saying we can exploit and manipulate more people with highly produced videos. Watchtower initially is all like, oh, who'd want to do that? Who'd want to use technology in that way? Give it a few decades, Watchtower's like, we've had an amazing idea. We're going to use videos to spread our message. And then sure enough, even the songs, even the music starts to sound the same. But it's Christendom. It's Babylon the Great that was there first. Watchtower is merely in the game of copying. So those were my thoughts on the March JW Broadcasting episode. I apologize for leaving it right to the end of March to get this out, but I've been rather preoccupied with various other things, not least a pandemic, and that we also had ICSA towards the beginning of the month. But hopefully this has nevertheless been of interest for you. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos, and as always, thank you for watching.
Oh,